Welcome back, modders, to another video in the Empire at War modding tutorial series. Last time I got several requests to demonstrate how to do hardpoints for capital ships, space stations, anything that has hardpoints. The process is the same for each of those. So what we'll do is we'll go over how to add hardpoints to the aggressor model that I pulled up here from my Rise of the Mandalorians mod. We'll go over how to add hardpoints for lasers, shields, and engines, demonstrating how to add the hardpoint itself, damage particles, and blast marks. So let's get started. Obviously, you'll need your ship model already pulled up. Let's first demonstrate how to add just a basic hardpoint for something like the shield generator. On my aggressor model, I use this kind of command tower here as my shield hardpoint. So we'll first go to the helpers button here in our 3ds Max toolset, and we'll create a dummy. Doesn't matter how big it is, just click and drag, make your dummy. We'll go to our orthographic view. Created that way out there. We'll move it right where it needs to be. Center it as best we can. Doesn't have to be precise. You can use these numbers down here and edit those values if you are really picky about it being exactly centered. 0, 0, 0 centers it right in the middle of our grid here if I hide my hull. Changing those three values to 0 here, we'll put it right in the middle of the grid. Obviously, we want it centered to our command tower. About right there is fine. Now we need to rename this something that makes sense. The naming convention for your hardpoints isn't as critical as some other naming conventions. You mostly just want to make sure that it's something that you'll remember because you'll have to reference it later when you code the hardpoints in your XML. It's also just helpful to keep your scene clean. If you're working with a capital ship that has dozens of hardpoints, you want to be able to find them quickly. So naming them something that makes sense is important, and it is an industry standard practice. I'll just call it B_ShieldGen. Also, for good measure, I'll go into more, open up my Alamo utilities, and uncheck the export geometry box so that when this exports to Alamo format, it's only exporting a bone at the origin of my dummy rather than exporting a cube. Once that's there, the hardpoint in and of itself, in its most basic form, is actually ready to go. All we have to do is go into our XML code and make sure that we're referencing this B_ShieldGen when we code in our shield generator hardpoint. And that's it. So if you're just aiming to get something in the game quickly, making hardpoints that are non-weapons and non-engines, so shield generators, tractor beams, any kind of special hardpoint like that, is really simple. If we want to take it a step further and add damage particles, what we need to do is select our hardpoint, bring up our translate tool by hitting W, hold shift, click on the translate tool, and this will make a clone. And we want to call it B_ShieldGen damage, or you can call it damage particle or B_ShieldGen particles. It doesn't matter. Again, you will be able to call this essentially whatever you want because the name is just referenced in the XML code, but in terms of getting it to work, there's no specific naming convention. So I'll just call it B_ShieldGen damage, hit OK. That will create my clone. And just for ease of visualizing these different things in my scene, I'll just move it up here so that I can see that they're separated. Now what I need to do is I need to take this new dummy and link it by activating the link tool in the top left, clicking the selected object and dragging to what I want to link it to. It'll flash to show that the link has been made. Lastly, I want to go back to my Create tab in my 3ds Max toolset. Make sure I'm still under the Helpers button and click Alamo Proxy. And I want to place an Alamo proxy somewhere near this hardpoint that makes sense. Now, if you want to get creative and have multiple little fire plumes or smoke plumes or whatever it is, sparks or electricity that you want to indicate that that area has been damaged, you can have multiple Alamo proxies all activating at once. So let's just say that I want my fire to be right here. Now let's say that I want another fire right here. And let's say, just for the heck of it, I want a third fire behind the tower as well. All three of these proxies I can now select and go back to my link tool and link all three of these with my particles, my particle dummy, that is. So it's hardpoint bone, particle bone, link the particle bone to the hardpoint bone, create your actual particle proxies, and link those to your particle bone. The last thing we have to do is we have to name our proxies. So these just have to be named whatever the name of your particle that you want is. So if I have a particle in my mod that is a blazing fire of some sort or a smoke plume, I just have to make sure that the name of my proxy matches identically the name of that particle file. So I'll just call mine P_HP damage small. And I'll copy that name to each one of these proxies. So now, assuming that our hardpoint XML is correct, we should have a hardpoint that, when dead, will spawn 3 fire particles in these locations. Weapons are essentially the same process, but let's do a weapon hardpoint and I'll show you how to add a damage decal to it. So I'll create another dummy. Make sure that this is centered with my turret ring here. And I want to make sure that the x-axis lines up with the edge of my mesh. In fact, let me change the color of this so it's easier to see. There. So we'll make sure that that's about level with the mesh. And then I can come up here and change my viewport to smooth highlight, which will help me greatly to center that within my turret ring. Okay. Now we need to name this something that makes sense as well. Personally, in my mod, I found the easiest naming convention is simply to call it b_attach and then a numeric value of some sort. 00 is typically how the game starts a number sequence. This hardpoint then, when I hold shift to duplicate it, automatically becomes battach 01. So for battach 00, I'll delete 01 for now. we'll follow the same process. We'll hold shift, we'll use our translate tool to drag it up. We want to call this battach 00 damage. We'll create another proxy roughly in the middle of that hardpoint bone. Again, making sure that the x-axis is about flush with the edge of the mesh. We'll call it B HP damage medium. We'll link that to our particle bone. Double check that our particle bone is linked to our hardpoint bone. Now what we're going to do is an actual damage decal. This is a separate mesh from the rest of the model. I've actually already made mine. So I'll unhide it. Now this mesh, if I go into wireframe mode real quick, it's just a plane. It's a planar mesh that I have pulled some of the edges down on so that it remains flush with the edge of my actual ship geometry. And I've applied the blast texture to it. If I open up my materials editor, you can see W blast 00. This is a texture from the base game, by the way, so anybody can reference that when they're making their hardpoints. I've applied that texture to it, and I want to make sure that it is separated from the actual mesh of my model just a bit. If I look over here, if I were to make this flush with my mesh, it looks fine in the 3ds Max viewport, but when I pull this into game, there's going to be a flickering issue because essentially those two surfaces are competing in depth. They're competing for which one should appear in front of the other, and because they're so close together, the game engine can't decide. So they kind of flicker back and forth. To prevent that, we just want to make sure that there's a clear separation. It doesn't have to be much, but just a clear separation between those two surfaces. That way the blast decal will always appear on top. Now we want to select our blast decal, go back to our link tool, and link that to our hardpoint bone. And then we want to make sure that it's named battach 00_blast. That's it. That's the simplest way to make hardpoints with both a damage decal and a damage particle. Pretty easy. The last major type of hardpoint that you'll probably use is engines. As always, we'll go to our helpers button, create another dummy, and make sure that it is centered with our engine cowling or engine thruster, whatever type of engine we have on our model. Make sure that your X is even with the center of that cylinder. And I like to inset my particle just a little bit. Particles will always face the camera, so if you have it sticking out too far, it's going to look like your engine is like blowing bubbles or has this kind of ball sticking out of it. If you inset that just a little bit, it looks more like a proper engine glow. So we'll call this B_engines. Now if you wanted to, you could have a separate engine hardpoint for each one of these. For our purposes, we'll just do a single hardpoint for all of the engines. That's typically how most modders do it, and that's how the base game operates as well. In fact, having said that, we want to go ahead and move this to the center. That's my mistake. We'll move it to the center somewhere that makes sense to indicate that it applies to all engines. Like before, we'll hold shift and duplicate, and we'll call this B_engines damage. And now we have to do that one more time to make a third bone, and we want to call it B underscore engines underscore particles. We want to go to our Alamo proxy button. We want to create one Alamo proxy for each engine cylinder that we have. Okay. And we'll go ahead and make sure that each one of these is lined up with the actual mesh that it will be emanating from. And then we have to name them. And to rename multiple objects at once, we can actually go up to our Tools button, rename objects, and then we want our base name, P underscore aggressor engines. And it actually should be PE. This will just be the name of whatever your engine particle is, though. It doesn't have to be PE. I just like to do that because that's what the original game uses for particle engine, and then the name of the ship. We'll hit rename. Now we can see all of those have been renamed. Now we want to keep those engine particles selected, go back to our link tool, and link those to our engine particles bone. We want to take our engine particles bone and link that to our engine hardpoint. We also want to make sure that our damage bone is linked to the engine hardpoint as well. Okay, now for the damage particle. What I like to do is have smoke emanating from each of those engine tubes. You don't have to do that. If you want one big particle, that's fine. For the sake of time, we'll assume that you want to do one big particle. But the process is the same for every engine particle you want to make. All you have to do is make a new Alamo proxy. I'm just going to quickly duplicate this one. I'll put it right in the middle, and I'll rename it P underscore hardpoint damage huge. And then link that to my damage bone. So what that does is you have your hardpoint, your damage particles, and your engine particles. When the hardpoint is destroyed, this bone will activate, which activates your damage particle. Until it's destroyed, this bone will remain active, which activates all of your engine particles. Likewise, if the ship gets hit by an ion blast or anything that disrupts engine activity, you may have noticed in the base game, or maybe even some modded ships, that when a capital ship gets hit by an ion cannon, those engine particles will kind of flicker. This bone right here, your B engine particles, that is what controls all of that. So this bone is really critical to activate some of those neat and subtle effects that occur when a ship is hit by ion, or when it stops moving, the engine particles will kind of dim. All of those things are controlled with that bone, so it's really important to have that. And that's it for engine particles. In fact, that's it for all of them. If you have hardpoints that have articulating turrets and that kind of thing, that sort of thing, the setup for the hardpoint is exactly the same. The only additional step, just quickly hide those. The only additional step is to export your actual turret. Last video, I discussed how to set turrets up. Same exact process. You have your base turret, which is the rotational part, lateral rotation. You have your barrel, which is vertical elevation, and you have your muzzle. You want to make sure that these are linked properly. Barrel to turret, muzzle to barrel, and then you want to name them B turret 00, B barrel 00, and muzzle A 00. For each subsequent turret, B turret 01, barrel 01, muzzle A01, 02, 03, etc. Once that's finished, select it, File Export Selected, choose Alamo, and then let's say that I just named my ship Rebel Vehicle _ ship. I want to follow that naming convention and then add underscore turret 00. And then I can reference all of those things, the turret bone, the muzzle bone, the fire bone, and then this model name itself, all in the Hardpoint XML. And you'll do that, again, just renaming or changing this numeric value subsequently for each one of your turrets. If you want to attach a mesh to a hardpoint so that when that hardpoint is destroyed, the mesh will also disappear, it's actually the same process as exporting a turret like I just showed you. The only difference is that you'll just have this one base mesh that you'll call B, I don't know, whatever, hardpoint breakoff 00. Now this will sit based on its origin point, which happens to be the center of our grid in this particular case. That origin point will align with the origin point of your hardpoint. Throw it into the XML, this will appear there. Now this mesh automatically will disappear when the hardpoint is destroyed. Your turrets will as well. So that's it. Making hardpoints, pretty dang simple. Thank you for watching today's tutorial video. If you have questions about the video or suggestions for future topics, be sure to leave a comment down below. Also, if you'd like to support this channel and the work that I'm doing, feel free to donate to the PayPal link provided in the description below. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.